Oh, we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 5 of Insects Fair. This is the Urban and Medical Veterinary Entomology panel. Today, we have some wonderful UCR entomologists ready to talk to you about their work and the basics of this field. You can put your questions in the chats on Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom today, and we'll get to them after a brief presentation from the panelists. So, all right, Ben, you can take it away.
Awesome. So, hello, everyone. This is the panel on urban, medical, and veterinary entomology. We're going to go into panelist introductions, I guess, after introducing kind of first of all, just giving you guys a short presentation about kind of what is urban, medical, and veterinary entomology, but I'm Ben Hyman. So basically, all three of these disciplines are often grouped together because they often overlap in basically things that humans, or us as people, have a vested interest in, ourselves and our other people, our houses and buildings, and the pets and animals that are important to us. And there's some overlap between the insects that are studied between these three focuses. And I put some pictures of them here. You can see some that you might know, like mosquitoes and ticks and fleas. Some things you might have seen in your house or you don't want to see in your house, like cockroaches, termites, ants, and then some animals that are important to veterinary entomology and pests that may harm them that we study. To the next one. So just first of all, so urban entomology, it's a bit lesser known, but basically it's all of the entomology that encompasses our buildings and structures and our houses. And kind of the main suspects here are termites, cockroaches, and ants. Termites especially, their tendency to get into houses and kind of destroy foundations because they eat wood, this leads to billions of dollars in damage and repair just in the U.S., and as well as things like ants and cockroaches that people want to keep away from their homes or restaurants or buildings. Also, kind of important, if you guys have heard of bed bugs, who kind of in the past 20 years have kind of resurfaced as this important household pest, or if you're staying at like a hotel or something. And this just kind of created this entire industry of products and research on how to best combat these kind of urban enemies, pests. On the other hand, you have medical and veterinary entomology. So while some of the pests like yellow jackets or bed bugs, they can like sting us or bite us, medical and veterinary entomology is more focused on the insects that pose a greater threat than kind of just a single sting or things like that. And that's mainly focused on insects that are vectors of disease. So insects can carry diseases and spread them from animals to people, or from people to people, or animals to animals, and that's what a vector is. If you've heard of West Nile virus, it's vectored by a mosquito that gets it from a bird and then bites a human, and then that can make you or animals sick. Next one. So over 700,000 people die annually from vector-borne disease globally, and many, many millions more suffer from other insect vectored or arthropod vectored illnesses. And I just kind of listed a few of them. If you have any questions about any of them, you can ask us later. So these are just a few of the common or most prevalent vector-borne diseases globally, and some of the insects that vector or arthropods that vector them, and also some of the pathogens themselves, which are the disease-causing organism that is vectored by the insect. And also, not just humans are affected by these pathogens. Animals are as well, most notably livestock, like cows, chickens, sheep, and also our pets, so like dogs and cats. Those are my two dogs. Just had to get them in here. They can be affected by vector diseases like humans, but also if an animal is being bitten too much or the biting causes damage, it can reduce the health of the animals, which in the case of cows or chickens would then hurt the meat and dairy industry. So there's a vested interest in not only preventing the spread of disease, but sometimes also just controlling things that bite and kind of annoy our livestock as well. And there's a huge industry for protecting our pets from insects as well. Yeah, and with that, we can start introducing the panelists.
Okay, thank you, Ben. So let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. Alec Gary at UCR. I'm a veterinary entomologist, so professor of veterinary entomology. And what that means is that I'm interested in insects that bite animals or live on animals or transmit diseases to animals. And in particular, I'm very interested in insects that bite cattle and sheep and horses. So these would be blood-feeding flies, ticks, in some cases even mosquitoes that may be biting some of these animals. So you can see in the picture on the left, this is me and one of my former graduate students, and we're standing pretty close to a small herd of cattle. And this was a study we were looking at these small blood-feeding flies called horn flies, and we were trying to protect these cattle from those flies by putting repellents on these animals. So repellents are chemicals that the flies don't like, and so they won't land on the animal. I'm also very interested in understanding how insects are attracted to animals, including to humans. In the picture on the right, you can see a current graduate student of mine, Shinmi is her name, and I are standing next to a trap. So this thing between us is an insect trap. And the box at the top of that trap holds dry ice, which is frozen carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is one of the components in animal breath. So we all breathe out carbon dioxide, and that's one of the chemicals that insects use to find us. So I'm very interested in understanding how insects respond to those chemicals and how these traps might work. So that's my research, and I will pass on the baton to the next individual.
Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Murillo. I'm also a professor of veterinary entomology here at UC Riverside, and I am interested in livestock, but a little bit of a different critter. So I am interested in chickens, in particular the birds that we keep that provide eggs for our households. And I am interested in studying the insects that negatively impact these birds. So a lot of the insects that negatively impact chickens are what we call ectoparasites. So they actually will live on the birds, and they are lice or fleas or mites. And they use the chickens not just for habitat and a place to live, but they also blood feed while they're on the chicken. And I'm interested in understanding how these blood-feeding insects negatively impact the birds, not only how the birds lay eggs and the economic side of it, but also how it impacts the birds' behavior and the overall welfare of the animals. In addition, I also am interested in controlling these insects to help mitigate and make the negative impacts of these insects less on the animals. So I've been interested in chickens for a very long time, as you can see my timeline here, and this is my way of being able to help animals. So with that, I'll pass it on to Julie.
Hi everyone, my name is Julie Kokoris. I am a fourth-year PhD candidate here at UCR in Dr. Alec Gary's lab. So I kind of did a little history with my pictures. Ben and I had joked earlier that we need to get a couple more recent pictures of ourselves, but as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, my interest in entomology really got established when I was doing my undergraduate degree at Texas A&M. And I went on to get my master's in public health at the University of North Texas Health Science Center. And while I was there, I was lucky enough to be able to be a part of the surveillance that was going on to study the mosquitoes that were transmitting West Nile virus in Fort Worth. So as you can see, there's a white pan on the table, and those are actually mosquitoes that I'm knocking out of the nets that had been set up the night before. And so what we would do is we'd go trap weekly. We'd bring those mosquitoes back into the lab. I would put them into the freezer because they would be used to be tested for the disease surveillance that we were doing. And I decided to take a few years off after I got my master's. I went to work for San Diego County's vector control program, where I worked on their outreach and surveillance team. And I decided that I just wanted to continue my education, so I came back to UCR. Got really involved in their outreach, studying specifically one species of mosquito called Culex tarsalis, which is a major vector for West Nile virus here in the state of California, as well as the United States. And I'm studying the different pockets of where those mosquitoes occur throughout the United States. So it's kind of important if you think about, there's different microhabitats across the United States, how these mosquitoes, even though they're the same species, can differ greatly from location to location. It's important as a scientist to understand the differences among those groups and how those could potentially impact the disease transmission that's occurring in those locations. In addition, I also study insecticide resistance, because we have to understand how to control these mosquitoes so they don't pose a public health risk to our public health. So with that, I will pass on the baton to Ben.
All right, so in this glut of pictures, I just drew in some things I'm interested in and some current work and some past work. I am a third-year PhD student here at UC Riverside. My main interest, besides insects, is mostly just ecology, so I'm interested in how organisms interact with their environment and how that affects how that plays into vectors' role as in their environment. So how does their use of the environment and our use of pesticides and things, how do those things interact to affect public health because these organisms spread diseases. So I am currently working with Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus, which are two invasive species of mosquito in Southern California and other places in the U.S. And they're important because they vector some dangerous diseases, mostly viruses like yellow fever and dengue, Zika, we heard of a few years ago, chikungunya as well. And currently, if you can look at the top left photo, I work in how Aedes mosquitoes use bromeliads, which are those plants you can see there, how they use bromeliads as habitat in kind of suburban areas where bromeliads are popular ornamental plants. So they fill with water, and then mosquitoes actually lay their eggs in them, and they can use them as habitat, which is not a good thing for us. So I'm looking at how we can kind of control the mosquitoes that are using those to breed, but also what kind of role the bromeliads are playing in the spread of these invasive mosquitoes in California. Some other stuff I do is on the the right, you can see one of my colleagues in a storm drain checking a mosquito trap. He's doing a study on bait stations and how the storm drains can be treated because a lot of mosquitoes are there. I'm also collecting spiders at night at the bottom right, checking a mouse for ticks, teaching some science. It's all good. Glad to be here.
Thanks for all of that wonderful information. And we haven't gotten any questions yet, so I encourage everyone to comment in Facebook and on Zoom and in the YouTube. But I actually have a question I thought of, and it may be a more complicated question, but I've heard of something called a sentinel chicken, and I want to know more about these sentinels, and I also want to know, are there cattle versions of sentinel chickens? So hopefully there's some good answers.
Well, you might think that's an Amy question because of the chickens, but I actually think Julie, working in vector control, should be the one to at least start the answer.
All right, let's see if I can do a good job explaining this. So the sentinel chickens that were used, there was 2 flocks in San Diego that were used, and they're used as a way to survey the disease transmission that's going on within the county. So a lot of times it's called seroconversion. So we'll be able to detect the virus in the birds early on in the season to understand if the mosquitoes in those localities are also actively transmitting the virus. And that way we get a better idea because we're testing the chicken blood, and we're also
Oh, looks like Julie might have frozen. Then you want to take up the reins and talk about sentinel chickens?
Well, so kind of in the name, I think is Julie back now. So when the chicken is bitten by a mosquito, oh wait, are you back, Julie? I'll let you.
Am I?
Yeah.
I'm even Ethernet connected right now, so of course. But we're good? You can hear me?
Yeah, the audio.
Yeah, I think the last thing you said, Julie, was you mentioned that you had a couple of sentinel chicken flocks in San Diego that you had worked with. So you might start again from there.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry about that, guys. So there were 2 flocks that we would monitor in San Diego County that were known to be active areas of virus transmission throughout the summer. And the reason you use sentinel chickens is because usually you can get up the curve as far as understanding the disease, the transmission that's going on within those areas. So you're monitoring the blood that you take from those chickens as well as the mosquitoes. You're testing those for virus as well. So it's a really good way to know ahead of time how much virus is in that locality. And yeah, I think I'm hoping that that was all clear on my end as far as Wi-Fi stuff. So yeah, thanks.
And I can take the second part of that, Tessa. That question was, are there sentinel cattle or sentinel other animals? Generally, with these sentinel systems, the idea is that you're using some less maybe important or less valuable animal to watch for disease transmission so that you can protect the more valuable animal. In the case of the sentinel chickens, the more valuable animal being us humans. So we want to know that if there's transmission occurring before we humans become infected. There is sometimes where that would play out in an animal system as well. So if you have some animals that are, let's say, a highly prized animal, maybe some race horses, for example, and you want to know when there's transmission of something occurring in an area where you have those race horses, you might use sentinel chickens or even other horses as sentinel animals, maybe less valuable horses that you'd be monitoring and taking blood from periodically to see if there's some kind of active transmission. And if there is, then you can take some precautions for your more important or more expensive animals like those race horses. So there are some times where where we do have sentinel animals to protect other animals, but it's a more common thing certainly to protect humans.
in the same vein of monitoring, we also have like dead bird monitoring programs. So anytime in California that you find a dead bird that's not like decomposed, recently dead bird, you can actually call the West Nile virus hotline, because they're kind of doing a similar thing where if a bird died kind of in the open, it might be because of the virus. So they'll actually come and collect the dead bird, and then they'll run similar tests to see if the virus was present in that bird, so they can kind of get a hold of where the virus is.
Yeah, this is a really common thing here in San Diego as well, where a lot of times crows are called in, as well as certain, like the red-shouldered hawks are capable of also having West Nile virus within their systems. So it's a really cool process where I remember that the ocular fluid around the eyes actually tested, as well as several other areas now that, of course, I'm blanking on. Feel free to chime in, veterinarians, on this. But it's another great way to understand. It's a little harder to trace if you think about it, right? Birds obviously move and fly, so that's why the sentinel chickens are so important, because they literally are just in one location throughout the season. But yeah, again, another very important aspect of mosquito surveillance for understanding the disease transmission in your community.
Thanks for all those. Oh, Alec, did you have more?
I was going to say, I actually have a question for Dr. Murillo if we don't have any other audience questions.
Go for it.
So, I know that in the Riverside area, we have a lot of backyard chickens. In fact, it's becoming more common, I think, throughout Southern California. And a few years ago, Dr. Murillo did a survey of chickens and the ectoparasites that they had. And I'm just curious, were there some that were more common in chickens? I know you found some that were kind of rare as well, but maybe you can mention those that were most common, that if people had chickens, they should be watching for.
Yes, absolutely. So we surveyed all over Southern California, and the most common parasites we found were lice and fleas. And the lice, there are a few different species, but that's more, something someone like me would care about. If you're a chicken owner, you don't really necessarily care what kind of louse it is. You probably just want to control it. So there were lots of chicken body lice, and they're found all over the animals. And then the fleas that we found, they're called stick-tight fleas. So they're not your typical cat or dog flea that you might occasionally have run into if you have a cat or dog where they're hopping around. These fleas actually embed in the skin of their host, and they stay sessile while they feed. And on chickens, they really like the bare skin of the face of the bird, and the combs, which is the top part, and the wattles, which is the bottom part. And the fleas will hang on, and they look like little seeds attached to the chicken. And the fleas just hang out and feed, and they'll lay their eggs without even leaving the bird. So they'll just lay and pop eggs out into the environment. So there's immature fleas developing in the coops or near the chickens. And for the lice, all the life stages are found on the bird. So they have some very interesting life histories. And if you're interested more learning about how to control them, I actually recorded a talk for earlier in this insect fair, which would probably be a little bit easier to go watch that video and get more information about the specifics of these different ectoparasites and recommendations for control.
Thank you. I have a question from a watcher. The listener heard that plague is being detected in Colorado and is wondering if there is plague in other regions like California.
Anybody want to take that, or you want me to answer that?
Why don't you go ahead and start?
Okay. So the listener is correct. There is plague in Colorado, and we also have plague in California. It's actually not uncommon. It is very uncommon in people, fortunately, but it's not uncommon in the wild. So there are a lot of wild rodents, squirrels, and other wild rodents that are infected with plague. Plague is transmitted to those rodents by bites of a flea. actually several different kinds of fleas. So if you go out to some of the camping areas in the Sierra Nevadas, for example, we do see plague out there in the rodents, and the fleas are transmitting it. In Colorado, the transmission is with prairie dogs, or the host that's infected with plague are primarily prairie dogs, and again, it's a flea that's involved in that transmission. And this is the very same plague from the Middle Ages, where we had in Europe, we lost 25% of our population to this disease. So the very same plague, it simply moved over here as ships brought people and rats to the New World, to the United States. Fortunately, we do not see it in our cities anymore, so we don't have it in Los Angeles or San Francisco, and it is very limited. And we have a number of people who work for the state of California Department of Public Health and other states as well, who watch very carefully for this, and they close down campgrounds periodically if they find plague is there. So it's not a big risk for people. But the listener is right, we do actually have it.
Thanks, Dr. Gary. What other surprising pathogens do we have in California, or more specifically in Riverside? Because I know Julie and Ben both mentioned West Nile virus, but what might surprise us? Or what would you like everyone to watch out for?
Julie, do you want to talk about some of the other mosquito-transmitted viruses?
I can do that, although the first thing, and I'm not an expert in this, I was thinking about the typhus and the cat fleas over in LA. That's a unique type of disease transmission. Dr. Gary, if you want to comment more on that, because you're a little bit more familiar. But that's the first one that I was like, oh, that was something new to me in this area in the last couple of years.
Yeah, that's true. So and we see this in some parts of LA, but mostly Orange County. There's the transmission of a parasite, a bacterial parasite that causes a disease we call typhus. And typhus can be transmitted by fleas. In this case, there's a murine typhus, a flea-transmitted typhus that's there in Orange County. That is relatively new, or at least it was unrecognized until maybe 10 or 15 years ago. We first began to see that form of typhus out in Orange County. So yes, there certainly is that disease. There have been a number of viruses transmitted by mosquitoes that go back for many, many years. And in fact, and I'll let Julie talk about maybe some of those, like St. Louis encephalitis in just a minute. But maybe I'll mention before I pass it on that, our mosquito and vector control districts have been fighting diseases transmitted by mosquitoes for a long time and protecting us from those diseases. All the way back to malaria. We used to have malaria in California transmitted by certain species of mosquitoes called Anopheles mosquitoes. So we don't have this anymore in California, fortunately, but it has been here, and it could be here again if we're not careful about making sure that we continue protecting ourselves from mosquitoes. So, and I'll let Julie talk about some of these other viruses that mosquitoes transmit.
Sure. So the ones most recently, if anyone has been following the news in the last year, especially last summer, Eastern equine encephalitis actually came back on the East Coast and was pretty nasty last year. Unfortunately, it has a very high or a higher fatality rate than West Nile virus. So it was, I know, a huge concern the past summer. I know over in Coachella Valley, they have had a history of St. Louis encephalitis, which is also in that same family as West Nile virus. And again, these encephalitis viruses, they commonly affect, while the symptoms are kind of flu-like and stuff, most people don't develop severe disease. However, in those that do, these neuroinvasive symptoms are quite extreme, and they usually affect the older population as well. So over in the Salton Sea, usually on, I believe it's the North Shore, is where they'll see a lot of activity of these encephalitis-type diseases. So Coachella Valley, their mosquito control district, they do a lot of work trying to get these hard-to-reach areas within there because there's also a lot of nesting areas for birds to hang out in, and so that disease transmission is going back and forth between those two groups. So those are the big ones. Ben, what about, have you thought of anything else since you're another mosquito person?
I wasn't thinking of surprising mosquito. I mean, we're like just with increased globalization, we're seeing more and more incidences of uncommon mosquito-borne diseases in the U.S. The first thing that came to mind when I thought of like unexpected or weird diseases to come up recently, at least, or is in the past 20 years, we kind of discovered that Lone Star tick bites can cause meat allergy. So it's something, I forgot what it's called, but basically there's like a protein, it's not a pathogen, it's actually a protein in these tick saliva that sometimes when people are bit by them, and they're very common, alpha-gal, that's what it is. They're very common ticks in the U.S., and just sometimes when people are bitten by them, it causes an allergic reaction that makes the person from then on allergic to meat, to red meat. And that could be, just as devastating as encephalitis for some people. I don't know. It's not, it's been shown to not be permanent, but that's just a weird kind of vector. It's from a vector insect, or a vector arthropod, the Lone Star tick, which also vectors all kinds of rickettsial diseases, but that's just one that people might not want to get either.
Kind of piggybacking off of Ben and talking about ticks, I think people from the East Coast think about Lyme disease quite a bit, and we tend to not think about it here in California, but we do have some Lyme disease transmission, and we do have competent vectors. So that means we have ticks that are capable of carrying the disease and transmitting it to people. This tick is called Ixodes pacificus, and it's especially in Northern California, but even in Southern California at elevation, if you're hiking in the mountains, you might come in contact with these ticks. So it's definitely important to be aware of if you're out hiking or if you're out with your dogs to look for ticks after you've had some outdoor activities.
Thanks for that warning about the ticks. I was going to ask. We got another question on Facebook, and this is kind of a fun one. Is climate change affecting pests in urban areas? And I'll expand that. How about our pathogen vectors as well? So pests, urban, and medical.
Who wants to start?
Well, let me actually start in Europe. So I will tell you that I do research on a biting fly, a small blood-feeding fly, and there's very good evidence that the populations of this fly are moving northward. They're expanding northward, very likely because of climate change. So as climate change increases temperatures, it allows these insects to move further and further northward into areas that used to be too cold for them. And because of that, there have been outbreaks of a disease transmitted by this little fly in Europe. This disease is called blue tongue because it turns the tongue of the cattle blue. So Europe has been having outbreaks of this disease now for about 15 years, in great part because of climate change. So that's kind of over in Europe. Is it happening here in the United States? Certainly. And I don't know if anybody has any stories or anything they'd like to share in the U.S. based on their experience. Anybody else want to jump in?
Ben, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the short answer being yes. The main function being, while we have, so like I was talking about a lot of important mosquito-borne diseases like yellow fever and dengue that aren't in the U.S., we do have the mosquitoes that can vector them. And one of the barriers to vectoring diseases, other than just the diseases being brought over, is the insect that's vectoring it needs to kind of have enough time for the pathogen to reproduce inside of their system. And in that way, climate change has kind of increased the range at which these insects can undergo this this developmental period of the pathogen because of temperature increases and range increases. So not only is the range of some vectors increasing because of climate change, it's climate warming towards the poles, but also their capability to vector certain pathogens is also increasing as the temperature does.
Another way that climate change is impacting insect pests is not just the warming, but the lack of cold. And one example of that is ticks and their relationship with moose. So this is something that has been seen in northern areas where in other times it would get cold enough in the winter that it would kill off ticks or decrease tick populations at least. And we're not seeing those cold periods anymore. And so there are just devastating images of baby moose being covered in ticks to such a degree that it can actually kill the moose if there are enough ticks taking blood from them. So, that's another way to think about the effects of climate change, not just the range expansion or the different diseases, but also what not having that cold period is doing to the ecosystem.
I'll follow up with another effect of climate change, specifically in mosquitoes. So mosquitoes have this really cool behavioral trait called diapause. So the best way I can compare diapause is kind of like hibernation when bears go to sleep for the winter. It's the same type of thing in mosquitoes where they kind of switch off to this low activity period. And usually between the changes in the sun, like it's a timing thing, but also it's also very much a temperature thing. So as temperatures are quite high and stay high, these mosquitoes aren't being, this trigger to go off for this hibernation type behavior is becoming a bit delayed. And so that means as far as a season for mosquitoes and trying to survey for mosquito diseases, we could be seeing diseases at a later point in time because these mosquitoes are still active. So it's a really cool trait that they have, and understanding it in relation to climate change, I know is going to be a very important part of the field, for the next several decades for sure.
Thanks for all those answers. So I have a couple follow-up questions. The first is, can the meat allergy from the ticks be reversed, or are you stuck with that forever?
I do not believe there's a treatment for it, but it's not, I don't know the time scale of how long it lasts. It lasts a long time, like years and years, but I think it has been shown to kind of taper off, kind of like other allergies. It can kind of, it takes a while to develop and then it can kind of recede, but yeah, it's not a fun thing. I don't eat red meat, but it would be a bad thing to have.
Good to know. And then I have another question. How can we tell if we're interacting with a dangerous vector or just a regular insect? Like if you're just out and about, what will make you recognize that you're seeing something kind of dangerous?
Well, the first thing is it's biting you. So that might be the first clue. This is an insect you don't want to be around you. So anything that appears to be trying to feed on you or bite, and it may not be a painful bite. A lot of these insects have evolved to bite quite painlessly, so you don't notice that you're being bitten. You can think of mosquitoes, for example. Oftentimes we don't realize we're being bitten until we get the itchy welt afterwards. The mosquito's already gone. So that would be the first clue, is that something is biting you. And not everything that bites can carry diseases, so it doesn't necessarily mean that you've been given a disease because you were bitten by something. And even if it's an insect that can carry a disease, very few of them actually carry a disease. So again, your risk is very, very low, and you shouldn't be too concerned with it. But I guess the first thing is, again, if it's biting you, that's probably not something that you want around you. That's something you'd like to remove. I don't know if anybody else has any ideas they want to expand on that.
I just feel like if you're trying to identify a mosquito in the process of getting bitten by the mosquito, it's a bit too complicated. So probably better not to just, go ahead and swat it. Or
at that point, it's too late anyway.
Too late.
Actually, so since Dr. Murillo talked about ticks and Lyme disease, I don't know, you might want to talk about the importance of removing that tick kind of quickly, because that's a little bit of a different animal relative to mosquitoes or other things that might bite you in terms of your risk.
Absolutely. So ticks, they're not like mosquitoes that feed very quickly and fly away. Ticks are going to sneakily feed on you, and they're going to do it for a long period of time. And the longer that tick is attached to you, the greater risk of some sort of disease or pathogen being transmitted to you is. So with ticks, that's why I mentioned a tick check when you come back from the outdoors is if a tick attached to you, you can find it earlier and remove it. And there's lots of really good resources with pictures and videos to show you how to safely remove ticks, but pretty much you want to get as close to the skin as possible and pull it off. And with ticks, you might want to save it, especially, for people, we might find a tick pretty quickly, but I know even myself with my training, oftentimes I won't find the tick on my dog until it's started to feed and what they do is they engorge and they get really fat with blood as they're feeding. And the fatter they get, the easier it is to find them. And so oftentimes when I find a tick on my dog, it's already started to get a little fat. And so what I do is I remove that tick and I will put it in a Ziploc bag and I'll put it in my freezer. So not only have I removed the tick safely and now I've killed it so it can't go attach to anyone else in my house, but if my dog were to get sick, I could then take that tick back out and I could take it to the proper vet I happen to have that skill. I could identify the tick and find out what it was. But if I didn't, then I could take it to my vet's office and I could say, my dog got sick a week after this was feeding on it. Can you identify it and maybe figure out if there might be a pathogen involved? So that's something that is a little unique with ticks compared to some of these other blood-feeding insects we've been talking about.
That's good to know to save any ticks that you find on yourself or your pet. And then I was thinking about how I've had conversations with people about mosquitoes where they say, well, why can't we just kill off all the mosquitoes? And I was wondering if our mosquito experts here, or Dr. Murillo or Dr. Garey, can talk about why maybe we don't want to do that, or maybe we do want to do that.
And give the ecologist's point of view.
Yeah, I have also read fully embellished papers on our capability or on the ecological blip that would be deleting all of the dangerous mosquitoes. There's some arguments for both sides. I think I kind of stand on kind of the mid-ground. I think it was, I don't know who wrote it. It was E.O. Wilson, I think, wrote on it, where he said, they're important ecologically, of course, but maybe just Anopheles gambiae. Maybe we could just, just Anopheles gambiae. Just because there are some mosquitoes that are so correlated with human activity. They pretty much only live around humans and they only bite humans, that they're not going to really be having that big of an ecological impact in the natural scale. But on the larger scale, mosquitoes are really cool. It's a really cool family of insects that kind of that are part of this group that they can take advantage of all kinds of different habitats, and what they're doing is they're taking nutrients from these little puddles and they're developing, and then they're flying out of it, and then they're kind of introducing this whole underutilized nutrient source to the higher trophic levels. So, in that way, they're very important to a lot of ecosystems. But if we were to talk about eradication, you could have an argument for focusing on the ones that are really closely related to humans and pose the most threat to humans. Yeah, because those are only like a couple species out of 3,500. So.
And Ben, there is that one really cool group of mosquitoes that actually don't bite and blood feed, but they're actually predators on other mosquitoes, so they're good ones, right? The elephant mosquitoes.
Yes, there are. In the U.S. we have them, not really California, but there's a genus of mosquitoes called elephant mosquitoes, Toxorynchides, that they lay their eggs in similar habitats as mosquitoes, but then when those eggs hatch, they eat the other mosquito larvae that have been hatched there from other species, dangerous species. And then when they emerge, they don't take blood meals at all. They kind of just only take nectar, which means that they're actually pollinators. So, not all mosquitoes are bad.
That's good to know. I thought of another insect that's kind of been on the news maybe about 2 years ago. Not so much for California, but for Texas. And that is the kissing bug. And I think Chagas disease. Do we have that in California?
You want to take that, Dr. Murillo?
Sure. Yes, we do have kissing bugs in California. Kissing bugs are called that because they like to bite around the mouth of their victim. And so they're a blood-feeding bug, true bug, and they can transmit a disease called Chagas disease, and it's actually a little parasite. And in California, and please correct me if I get any of this incorrect, but in California, while the bugs are capable of having this pathogen, this disease, there's a behavior difference in the species we have. So in Central and South America, and in, I guess, parts of Texas, it sounds like, when these kissing bugs are on the face and biting their host, they poop right away. And this disease is transmitted in the poop of the bug. And so if they're feeding and then pooping on the face, what happens is people rub, it's an itchy bite like mosquitoes, and they can actually get the disease that way. It's from rubbing of the feces. In California and in other places in the U.S., the bugs, they feed and they'll take the blood, but then they actually leave and then they poop away from the people. And so that ability to actually complete the transmission cycle, because of that slight behavioral difference, we don't see the disease transmission here in California that we see in other parts of the world.
Yeah, I'll expand on that in Texas, the reason you see transmission to dogs is not because the dogs are rubbing their wounds, the feces into the wounds, but because the dogs are probably eating the bugs. They're actually consuming the bugs and getting infected that way, which is also how their normal host of this pathogen, this Chagas disease pathogen, gets it. And that's wood rats and some of these other animals. So they're probably consuming the bugs and getting the infection that way. So we humans, fortunately, because we don't consume these kissing bugs, we're not getting the disease that way. So we do have to scratch it in. And as Dr. Murillo says, the insects, the kissing bugs we have here in North America generally don't defecate while they're feeding, and so the pathogen is not deposited on us where we would push it into our wound.
And just one thing to add on this. So actually at Texas A&M, Dr. Sarah Hamer, her lab, which is within their veterinary medicines and biomedical sciences program, she actually helps run a kind of a citizen science project where you can mail in your kissing bugs that you might have found around your house. They're doing surveillance to see if there's actually Chagas within those southern areas of Texas. So, and I put the link in our chat here, but it's a really cool project that they're running out there, and they've seen some pretty interesting results. So just another fun area of research within our world that's pretty unique. So.
Thanks for those great answers. And then I have a kind of off-the-wall question. We know that Dr. Murillo really liked chickens growing up, but how did the rest of you find your field?
Should we do this by age? So I'll start first. So I was a biology major in college when I did my bachelor's degree. I always loved living things in biology and ecology as well, so nod to Ben on that. That was my minor in college. I discovered that interest because as a child, a local college had a summer program where you could come and look through their microscopes at various things. And I was probably 9 years old, and I went and I spent 3 weeks at this local college campus looking at leaves and insects and all kinds of things, dirt, through a microscope. And I just got fascinated by all the living things that I could see in that microscope. I didn't know entomology, the study of insects, was actually a field you could major in until I was in college and took a class in entomology. First, I had never heard of this as a field, and I loved it. I loved the opportunities of collecting insects in the field, and then that sort of got me hooked on entomology. Yeah, I don't know if Amy, if you want to expand on your earlier experience in that first picture, but
Sure. Well, actually, while I've always loved animals, that was not the career path I was choosing. I actually became very interested in insects when I was in elementary school, and I had to do a project on the grossest thing I could think of. That was literally the project. And at the time, fifth grade Amy thought cockroaches were the grossest thing out there. And I remember sitting in the library flipping through the pages of this book talking about cockroaches. And as I read, I became more interested in them and less grossed out. And that really stuck with me. And after that, I had looked it up and I found out that someone who studies insects is called an entomologist. And I decided that I was going to be an entomologist. And so, very early on, I kind of had this idea. And then when it came time to pick a college, I picked one that had an entomology program that I could major in entomology, and kind of took a little time to figure out how to apply it, because you can't just sit around reading about cool bugs for a job. You have to actually do something. And I decided I liked problem solving and really liked the kind of the control aspect in a way. And so I tried plants, and I didn't like working in corn, and I didn't like working in turf grass, but I really did like animals. And so it was kind of a roundabout way to get back to veterinary entomology, but I'm very glad that I'm here, and I really enjoy what I do.
Okay, so I'll go next. I think the first interaction I truly had with insects was my first grade teacher had a tarantula. She had a couple of pets, but I definitely remember the tarantula. And I remember growing up, I would beg my dad to help me catch crickets so we could feed her, which was just such a weird thing for a first grader, I feel like, to request. So I kind of put that off to the side because I'd always really wanted to be a veterinarian. That was really where my passion was. So naturally, Texas A&M, I grew up in Dallas. It felt like the right choice because that's where I thought I wanted to go to vet school. And little did I know, going to an agricultural school, how much of an impact it would have on me. I took public health entomology, medvet entomology, and those were the courses where it really expanded the world of entomology that I hadn't truly discovered, and the interactions between us as humans and animals and also insects, this unique dynamic that's present that can cause these diseases. It just truly had me, I was sold. And so when I decided not to go to vet school, I decided to pursue my master's in public health, and somehow the timing of everything at West Nile kind of blew up in Dallas, and I was just there at the right time to study West Nile virus within Fort Worth and the Dallas area, and I am extremely lucky for that. So I feel like a lot of students don't know about entomology. So I help TA ecology, which has a lot of biology majors. And I think I stress all quarter long, don't be afraid to come to our field, come over to the dark side. So, like Amy said, it's maybe not an idea. It's not my first idea of where I thought I'd end up, but I'm extremely fortunate to be here today, and I love what I'm doing. So, Ben, you can go ahead and take it from here.
So I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska, and I think I spent a lot of time outside, and I like pretty much all animals and like nature, but it just so happens that insects are pretty much the most abundant thing, if you're out there looking around. And as you guys already pointed out, there's a joke that the Alaska state bird is a mosquito. No offense to the willow ptarmigan, but because the mosquitoes are so big and it's just terrible in the spring. So that was my first exposure to mosquitoes in general. When I moved to California for high school and in college, and I was always interested in entomology. Like my favorite bedtime book growing up was called The Big Book of Bugs. And like every page was like a full page spread on some insect. But I didn't really know how to apply it as a career until I was in this program at UCR where you just had to like find a PI to do a project in their lab. And because UCR had an entomology program, I wanted to take advantage of that. So I found a PI that would take me, and I spent, the first time I did like actual lab work, I was just like pouring water samples for 8 hours and doing like water chemistry. But as I was doing it, I just realized that, I don't really mind this. Like, this is kind of fun to me. And it kind of just went from there. I dabbled in a few disciplines, but I really like how medical entomology allows me to kind of combine the interest in ecology with, something that is a kind of a pressing issue for us as a species, and also be in a position where I can kind of do outreach and things like that, which is important to me. But entomology is great no matter what. So.
Thank you for all of your stories on how you got to MedVet entomology. And we're almost done with the panel, so just calling out if there's any last-minute questions, put them in the chat real quick. Otherwise, you can probably find us through UCR to ask further questions if you think of them. But all in all, I am preparing for mosquito season now. So probably it's time to start using some insect repellent. So is there anything we should use, like a homemade product or like whatever you can buy in the store? Because I'm always fighting with my sister about this.
So there's actually several options depending on what you're comfortable with using. So first and foremost, look at the active ingredients within the products. So DEET is usually the top of the line, number one recommended product. Anything, so Deep Woods off, those contain DEET as well. Then there's also picaridin, which is another active ingredient. There's 5. I'm going to see if I can remember this from my outreach days. So yeah, DEET, picaridin, IR 3535, oil of lemon eucalyptus, and then there's one more. If someone can help me out, I can't remember it off the top of my head.
The 3 you mentioned, DEET, picaridin, and oil of lemon eucalyptus, are the 3 that you'd commercially be able to find, I suspect.
Yeah, I know they carry those out usually like at Home Depot. They're there. So, yeah, those are the important ones. If you're going to put repellent on, those are the ones to go to. So.
All right. Thanks for that recommendation list. I'll be keeping it in mind. And for those of you listening, I hope you all enjoy the rest of the Insects Fair. This video will be recorded and uploaded to the Riverside Insects Fair or City of Riverside YouTube channel for watching later. And enjoy the rest of the Insects Fair. The weekend